everybody, and glad to hear the things the Lord has done already with us this morning, encouraging us, and the worship about His faithfulness and His love and our love for Him was all good. Testimonies. It's good to see how the Lord works in our lives, isn't it? Well, if you're here for the very first time today, you're going to hear something that's very rarely spoken about in this church. I'm going to talk about giving. It's called the grace of giving. When we had our State of the Church address a few weeks ago, I didn't really get through it all, and I wanted to kind of share a little bit about what happens financially in our church and kind of give people a picture of what it looks like. And I want to talk about giving. I believe our church is a very giving church, so we're not asking for money today, we're not taking up an offering, so everybody relax. But the things that Micah talked about, our ability to go into Guatemala or places like that is because people give. And, the things that enable us to carry out our church function and the mission God's given us is because people give. And there's lots of needs that people have, and people give to meet those needs. It never ever passes through the books of our church. It's not like we see all the giving that goes on. People give in many different ways. We made a decision many years ago to not take up collections in our church because we don't want people to feel like they're on the spot for giving. There's people who come to church to seek the Lord, to find out. And sometimes there are misuses in churches on how they coerce people to give. And that's not our heart at all. And so what we do in our church is we provide a box on the back wall. There's 4 boxes right there by the back door. And people normally put their money in those boxes. That's how we give. Now, I want to show the first slide, or the first 2 slides. Put it up there. I want to kind of give you a quick financial breakdown from last year, what 2012 was, just so you can kind of see our income and expense. This is what our income and expense was for 2012. And you can see on the top the total tithes and offerings, which comes to a monthly average, and total operational expense, which breaks down to a monthly average. That was 2012. And there's things on here that aren't really in this number. Like we do have what are considered like pass-through money, where, like for example, people who come and they pay for money to go on a mission trip, that's not reflected here. That's kind of a pass-through. The other thing that's not reflected here is, earlier this year, we did a large remodeling project in our church. We put new carpet, new pews, new chairs, new sound equipment, new paint. It was pretty much a whole remodeling project. And all that money for that came out of a fund. Before I was pastoring this church, I used to have a small group that was meeting maybe to develop into a church at one point in time. And those people gave tithes and offerings, and we didn't really have any expenses, so that money just kept building up over time, and we would give to missions and things like that, but the money was just basically sitting in the bank. And so when I came over here, we brought all that money with us, and all that was the money that was used on this remodeling project. Nothing came out of the original Alliance Christian Center funding. So that's not reflected here either. So I just got an email turn to the next one, Nate, if you would. This is what I'm most excited about in our church, is that we also give. When we receive tithes and offerings from you, we're committed to tithe as well. And we give minimum of 10%, often it's more than 10% of our income. And this is kind of a breakdown, 2 different ways of looking at it. And this year we're budgeting about $1,800 a month to go toward missions. We made some changes this year. We added some new missionaries. I want to read a little. I just got an email like literally 15 minutes ago. I was hoping to hear from him because I wanted to tell you. and it came here just this morning. I want to read it to you. But we added a missionary who's in Cambodia this year, and I want to tell you a little bit about him. Some of you remember Peter Siakama, who came and preached here last June. He's doing church planting and evangelism in Africa. We added him to this list. We added a man by the name of Jacob Bira, who's doing church planting and evangelism in India. So we were really trying to say, let's try to find organizations that we can invest in that are really doing the Great Commission. Because some of the things we do are charitable giving, and that's all good as well. The Bible talks about giving a cup of cold water and a piece of bread and visiting these people and those people. So there are charitable types of giving, but my burden is let's give and increase our giving around those that are really preaching the gospel, seeing people getting saved, and planting churches. So we added a lot of that this year as we modified our giving. So you see on the left, the breakdown of that $1,800 is the green is money that's going into a foreign place. It's not in the U.S. And the smaller blue piece of pie is money that's given toward organizations in America. An example might be the Alliance Pregnancy Center. So we do give our money to things in the U.S., but the bulk of it's going overseas, which I'm happy about because we want to do our part to reach into the world. Even though we're sitting here in Alliance, we can touch many people. And the other breakdown over here is by giving type. So the large green would be money given toward efforts that are evangelistic. Church planting, evangelism, leading people to Christ. The money that's in blue would be considered charitable. And things like that like we give money to the Guatemala mission, for example, which is Mark Richard. And while people are getting saved there, the focus is charitable. They're helping to provide wheelchairs for people. We give to the Alliance Salvation Army. We give them money every month because they're helping to provide food for needy people. So that's considered charitable giving. So the breakdown, again, I'm happy with the breakdown because my heart is let's put our money into the things that are winning people to Jesus. Because as the churches get established, the churches grow, the churches can take care of all those other needs. And then the yellow is something called other. And other, we have, for example, the man who started the church in Anchorage, Alaska, which is where we came from. He's retired now. We contribute like $100 a month to his retirement. He had been in the ministry for many, many years and never had a retirement thing. So there's a lot of different churches that help contribute toward that. That's other. And then we also contribute toward an organization called the Christian Law Association. How many of you know there's a lot of litigation that goes on in churches today? And this organization really provides free legal services to churches for any reason. They actually helped us many, many years ago in our Christian school, and we continue to support them today. So those are considered other giving. So that's a breakdown. This year, our goal is to give about $22,000 to these types of breakdowns. The individual organizations, I think there's about 14 of them, and they're listed on our website. You can go out there and see them if you want. But I just wanted to kind of give you a feel for what we do. We get income, but we also give. And I'm happy about that. Put the next slide on if you would. One thing we're doing, now we give, like I told you, through these boxes that are back here. We actually started, we started the ability for people to give online. And so it's just a convenience. It's another way to give. I want to show you how it works. If you go to our website, which is called alliancechristiancenter.org, there's a button on the front, right up there at the top, and a menu item that says Give Online. You can give to either one. If you click it, you go here, and there's just a little bit of teaching you can read, just a few comments. Then you click that button, it says Click to Give Online. It takes you to this application. If you're a first-time user, what you would do is you would click First Time, and what that does is it takes you to the next page, which is a registration page. And you just put your contact name, address, phone number, things like that. And at that point, your name is in the system. Then you can give now. This is hard to read, but basically if you click Give Now, you would just go in and put down your amount. You can put in, where you want it to go, tithe, offering, missions, benevolence, what have you. You put in your credit card or debit. I encourage you to use a debit card or a check card. If you use a credit card and you pay it off on a monthly basis, that's fine, but don't go into debt to give to a church. And then you push the submit button. And then your money goes automatically into the bank. April doesn't have to deal with it. It's a pretty simple way to do it. Then you can also do scheduled giving. If you don't want to log in every month, you can say, I want to give once a month or once every other week or once a week. You go in there, set it up, how many times you want it to go, start date, your credit card information, and you're done. And it'll automatically put it in there. And you'll get an email every time that your account is hit. And then the next page, under the My Account page, this is where you would go in. You'll see a list that'll come down here of all your giving for the year, and then you're able to actually put a printout if you click that print button, and that's what you would print at the end of the year to print out your form for your taxes. So it's just another way to give. One of the reasons I moved this direction is one of the young guys came to me about a month and a half ago, and he said, people in our generation never carry checkbooks or cash. I said, they don't. Well, how do you do things? He says, we always use cards. I said, well, hey, then let's give them an opportunity. So it's there if you want to use it. It's not necessary. You can still give the old-fashioned way. And we'll deal with that, huh? The old-fashioned way. Yeah, that's right. Let me just quickly read this email from Jerry Mishler. He's a guy that was in the church in Cambodia that's doing the church planting over there. We actually had a phone call with him talking about his ministry and what he was doing before we brought him on board as one of our giving units, or what do you want to call it? One of the people we support. But they were seeing thousands of people get saved. And here's his final report for the year. Hey, we are thanking you so much for your support. We received the printout the other day. We are so thankful that God has touched your heart to help bring the harvest here in Cambodia and to continue in discipleship with the new believers. We wanted to share with you that last year our final count was 31,200 salvations. And that's like bigger than the city of Alliance. And I'm like, I love to support people like that. They're sending people out, and they're going out, and they're preaching the gospel. They're knocking on doors. And to me, it's a great joy that we can take, we in Alliance, Ohio, or Canton, or wherever you live, somewhere near there, Hartville, we can take of the things that God gives us and invest it in somebody halfway around the world that's leading people to Christ like this. Your generous support each month reaches about 1,000 people each week for His glory. Praise God for that. I'd love to see 1,000 people get saved every week, but in a way, we're helping that to happen. So I wanted to encourage you with those things and just let you know that you play a part in all that. Someday it might be good if we go through all the different organizations we support and explain to you what they all do, so you can kind of get a feel for the benefit you're providing some people. And it's really a blessing to be able to hear the testimonies and see how God is. And again, that's not all, we're not doing all that, we're just a small piece of it. All it takes is many people giving a small amount, and something like that can happen. Micah's testimony a little bit ago about our giving toward the Guatemala mission. It's just many people giving a small amount, but look what it did. So anyhow, let's open our Bibles to 2 Corinthians chapter 8. I'm going to move through this fairly quickly, and I want to give you some testimonies as well as we go through here. It says, "Now, brothers, we want you to know about the grace." I want you to think about this word grace, because what we're talking about today is grace. It says, "We want you to know, brothers, about the grace that God has given to the Macedonian churches. Out of the most severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the saints." This service means the giving that they were doing. "And they did not do as we expected, but they gave themselves first to the Lord, and then to us in keeping with God's will. And so we urged Titus, since he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. But just as you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in your love for us, see that you also excel in" what? This grace of giving. So this grace he's talking about here in this chapter is the grace of giving. You ever heard of giving described as a grace? Well, today you have. It's called the grace of giving. It is something that God does in our lives that enables us to give. And he is saying, I want you to excel in this grace of giving like the Macedonian churches did. He's kind of setting them up as an example. He's saying, I want to tell you about the grace of God in their life, and then I want you guys to excel in this grace just like they are. So what we're going to do this morning is I'm going to talk about what was the grace of God in the Macedonian churches. What did it look like? Because here's a definition of grace from the Strong's Concordance. Grace is the divine influence upon a heart that begins to be reflected in a life. In other words, God begins to do something within me, in my innermost being, and that work in my life starts to get translated into how I live. And he talks about the grace of giving, and I believe the grace of giving is exactly that God does something inside of my heart that allows me to give. Most people by nature are stingy or selfish. I mean, it's almost like this self-preservation. I got to preserve myself. And there's this. I'm not saying there aren't giving people. I'm saying in general, we tend to be thinking about ourselves. I mean, you don't think it is true? Go look in the nursery sometime. Here, let me share my toy with you. How often do you see that? Every once in a while, you're going to see a cute little Johnny or cute little Susie. They're going to say, hey, I'll share my toy with you. But most of the time, it's like, give me that toy. I want that for me. And we grow up with this. And there needs to be a grace of God that comes into my life that attacks that selfishness and attacks the greed and attacks the self-seeking that says, I've called you to be a giver. Jesus said, it is more blessed to give than to receive. And I know that when you give, and when you give to other people, you give a gift or you give to the Lord in some way, you sense his favor. You sense that joy that kind of wells up inside of your heart. But I want to talk about the grace of giving. This is the divine influence upon a heart that begins to be reflected in the life. I want to tell you the story about me. When I got saved, I was raised up in the Catholic Church as a young boy And what we would do, I'm not proud of this, we would have envelopes that we would be given for church, and we would put, like my mom and dad would put like a quarter in there. And sometimes there's like this little perforation. I don't know if you guys know about that. And you can get that quarter because there was a candy store right down the road. So I'm not proud of that, but I'm telling you the truth. That's what happened. Not all the time. Sometimes we got convicted enough to put it in there, but every once in a while, that candy was way too tempting. Has anybody else ever do that? All right, we got some other people around here. All right. Well, when I got saved, I had never heard about giving or tithing God's way. We never gave. It's just we just went to church and hung out. Praise the Lord, we were growing. I needed a car, and there's a guy that came to me and said, I'm going to sell you a car, and you might not believe this. He sold me a 65 Mustang. That wasn't that big of a deal then because that was like 74. But it still was a nice car. I'm going to sell it to you, and I'm going to give it to you for $300. That tells you how long ago this was. And I said, well, look, I don't really have the money, because we were living paycheck to paycheck. He said, don't worry about it. You need the car, you take it, pay me when you can. I said, okay. So every week, our paycheck would come in, and I didn't have anything to give this guy. I'm like, I started feeling guilty coming into church. I'm like, where is that guy? I got to hide from him because I can't pay him for this car. One day, the pastor got up and he preached about tithing. And he mentioned how that one of the scriptures in Leviticus says that the tithe was holy to the Lord. And he kind of used an example when the Lord was standing before the burning bush and he said, take your shoes off, you're on holy ground. It's like, this belongs to him. And when I heard that, there was a divine influence in my heart. Something happened inside of me that was only something God could do. And I sat down that night with my wife and I calculated that we had been saved for 10 weeks. And I had received 10 paychecks. So I was getting paid every week. Now, I'm not saying you need to do this, but in my heart, the divine influence in my heart was, I'm going to give my entire paycheck to the Lord. Because I felt like, 10 tenths have gone by. Seemed logical to me. And in our church, we had a Friday night movie night, and I got paid on Friday. I got that check, and I cashed it, got the money, put it in an envelope, and we came to church, and we put it in the box. Now, you know what? We were living week to week, so I was giving away our future. But there was something of God, something that God did in my heart that moved that. I still today don't believe it was foolish. I believe it was something that God inspired. And we came home from church that night, and I looked up underneath. As we opened the door, there was an envelope on the floor, like stuck under the door. We had an apartment. I reached down and I picked that envelope up and looked at it. It said, to Kirk and Ruth from Jesus. Now, I know that Jesus didn't come and lay it in there. But you know what he did? Is Jesus had a divine influence in the heart of another person that was affecting their life. And somehow, I don't know how, the Lord told this person, go over there and stick this envelope under Kirk and Ruth's door. That is still a mystery today. No idea. And I walked in. I remember getting there and saying, hey, look at this. And Ruth was going off into the other room or something. And I opened this envelope and I start counting. There's a bunch of money in there, like a stack. And it's a bunch of $1 bills, So I'm like, guess how much was in there? $300. And I went to church the next Sunday. This was a Friday night. I went to church Sunday morning. I said, "Brother, thanks for the car. God bless you." Now, there's no way, you can't make these stories up. And I still remember that as if it was yesterday. From that day on, God has done a work in my heart concerning giving, concerning trusting, concerning the fact that He sees, there's nothing hidden from Him, and concerning His ability to take care of our needs. That was a divine influence in my heart that was affected in my life. So that's what I'm talking about when we talk about the grace of giving. It's a work that God does that does something inside of us. Let's talk about what it looked like in the Macedonian church. In verse 2, look at 2 Corinthians 8, verse 2. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. So think about this. I want you to look at these adjectives on here. He talks about the Macedonian church was in a trial. It wasn't just any trial. What kind of trial was it? It wasn't even just a severe trial. What does it really say? It was a very severe trial. I don't know what that was, but they were under a very severe trial. How many of you know when you're going through a very severe trial, you don't feel a lot like giving? Because it's almost like your focus is here. I'm going through a very severe trial. Something's happening, and you're kind of pulling within. But the Bible talks about the grace of God that was in this Macedonian church, that even though they were going through a very severe trial, he also says they were overflowing with joy. You know what that was? What was it that enabled these people to be going through a very severe trial, and instead of walking around with depression and griping and complaining, they had what was called overflowing joy? What was that? That was the grace of God in their life. It was the divine influence in their life that these severe trials did not stop the overflowing joy of God from having a part of their life. And that translated itself into what he calls rich generosity. But there's something else you need to see there in verse 2. Anybody pick up that little key word? They had rich generosity, but what were they? They were in it not just poor. It was poverty. It was extreme poverty. Now, in our lives today, our feeling is if we're in poverty, we shouldn't give. We live in a town of Alliance that has a lot of poverty. We should be a giving town. Poverty is not a reason to not give. To me, it is even more so a reason to say, God, I need your grace to have an effect in my life because my severe trial is stealing my joy. The widow who came into the temple, the Bible describes her as a very poor widow. She had 2 copper coins. The Bible calls it worth a fraction of a penny. How many of you know that is not going to make that big of a deal in the temple coffers? Most people would look at that and say, why did she even give that? You know who noticed this? You know who thought it was the greatest gift that day? What did he say? He said, this woman gave everything she had. I mean, her giving was one of faith. I mean, these were, when Jesus said she gave all that she had 2 coins rubbing together. She could have gave 1. I'll give you 50%. But this woman gave everything. Now, the Bible doesn't say what happened that week or that month, but to tell you one thing, the fact that Jesus took note of it, I can bet she was taken care of. So if you're poor and you feel like you can't give to God because you're poor, I would say you need a dose of the grace of God. God, give me your grace so I can give. This is God's work in our life. Isn't that amazing? This is the Macedonian church, and Paul's saying, I want you to see the grace of God that was working in this Macedonian church, because I want them to be an example for you. I want you to see what the grace of God does in the lives of people. And to me, it's a great story here. 2 Corinthians 8, verse 3, another thing that happened there, it says, I testify that they gave as much as they were able. And what does he say beyond that? Even beyond their ability. How do you give beyond your ability? I don't know exactly what that means, to be honest with you. Because, but I tell you, let me tell you another story. When our church, this church, Alliance Christian Center, was in existence back in the early 1980s, when our town went through it was like a recession. Most of the people in our church at the time were young families. They had never, ever experienced what it was to be laid off. People were losing their jobs. And I mean, you could walk into the church and there was almost like a tangible fear. What does our future hold? I mean, it's like you could cut it with a knife. And I was really burdened about this because it's like I felt like we were losing our ability to give. And I remember having an elders meeting. We had a guy at the time that was keeping the books at the church, and he would come to the elders meetings. He was a real numbers guy. I mean, it's like he wanted to know this and this in, this out, everything by the numbers. And it's never any element of faith. It's like if it's not in the math, it's not going to happen type thing. Sometimes you got to work in faith, So here's what I felt when we were having this meeting. I said, I feel like that we are in fear as a church, that we are allowing this loss of jobs to get the best of us, and people are withdrawing. We're losing our joy. We're walking in fear. I said, here's what I want to do. I want us as the elders to double our mission giving. Our income was going down too because people couldn't give. But I just felt like that we needed to give beyond our ability because we were letting that situation take control of our heart. And so I said, let's double our... Now, the guy that kept the books, what do you think he did? He's having a heart attack. He's having a heart attack. But, we did it. We said, okay, let's do this. We did it. And it's like things just began... It's almost like a thawing began to happen. Because we were saying, Lord, our faith is in you. It's not in this economy. It's not in whether a person has a job or not. And we're not going to let our giving be affected by what's happening here. We want to continue to give. And that was the grace of God in our lives. It enabled us to give beyond our ability. And we're still around. People found their jobs or started businesses. I mean, there are lots of different things that happened, but it was like a turning point where we could break through that grip that was on the hearts of people. Look at chapter 8, verse 3b. It says, entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded for us with the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people. What is this saying here? These people, they weren't being coerced. It wasn't like money was being dragged. They were running and saying, we want to give. It says, we are pleading with you. Not just pleading, but what? Urgently pleading. We want the privilege of sharing in this. Look no further. We are the people. What was happening? That was a divine influence that was upon their life that began to be affected in their life. And this is in the middle of extreme poverty, in the middle of a deep, severe trial. And they were saying, look, we count it a privilege to be able to participate in this. Let us help you. Isn't that counterintuitive? It's because it's the grace of God. The last thing here is in 2 Corinthians 8, verse 5. It says, they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves, first of all, to the Lord, and then, by the will of God, also to us. You know, I really believe that if you're going to be a giving person the way we're talking about here, you got to give yourself to the Lord first. Because giving is really an issue of the heart, isn't it? Well, I have a lot more scriptures here, but I'm not going to read them. I'm going to have to come back to this and continue this message because we're going to get some people baptized here in a few minutes. And while they're getting ready, I'll share a few final notes. But do you see these different characteristics here of a people who are being touched by this grace of God in their life? But look at the next verse in verse 6 and 7. So we urge Titus, just as he had earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part, since you excel in everything, in faith, in speech, in knowledge, and in complete earnestness, and in the love that we have kindled in you, see that you also excel in the grace of giving. The word excel means to be superabundant, above and beyond. How many here love to excel in faith? All right, we love to excel in speech. You know, we want to be able to speak, preach, teach, share the gospel, whatever. We want to excel in knowledge. Let me see your hands. How many want to excel in earnestness? How many want to excel in love? How many want to excel in giving? All right, I mean, that's what he's saying here. He's putting giving almost as a spiritual discipline. That these are things that happen as the grace of God is in our life. Yeah, we're excelling in faith, we're excelling in speech, we're excelling in knowledge, we're excelling in earnestness, we're excelling in our love, and we are excelling in our giving. And so what he's doing, he's kind of shifting gears here. He said, look at the grace of God in the Macedonian churches, look what it's done in them, and now that you see this, I want to urge you, I'm exhorting you to excel in His grace as well. And how does He do it? A couple things and I'll close. Look at verse 8. This may surprise you. And I want to let you know this is the Bible, not Kirk Martin speaking here. But I agree with the Bible. He says, I'm not commanding you, but I want to test the sincerity of your love by comparing it with the earnestness of others. What does that really say? Is he saying that he is testing the sincerity of people's love by their grace of giving? That's what it looks like. That's a heavy word, isn't it? You say, well, I love people. Well, you can prove it by your giving. You prove it by giving. There's no greater love. The Bible says there's no greater love than that a man lay his life down for his friend. That's the extreme sacrificial gift, to lay your life down. How many feel uncomfortable when you have this measure laid against your heart? It's an uncomfortable word, but it's nonetheless the Word of God. The next thing in verse 9 is he put Jesus forth as an example. He says, you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that through you his poverty might become rich. Our God is a God who gives. He gives lavishly. He gives abundantly. Look at all the things we have, the oceans, the skies, the stars. Why did God make the billions of galaxies? Because he gives. We didn't need a billion galaxies. All we needed really was the earth and the sun and a moon. But along with that, I'm going to give you billions upon billions of galaxies. And why did we have hundreds of species of fish? Why wasn't just like a bass enough? Why millions of trees? Why did he take 5 loaves and 2 fish and feed 5,000? He is a giving God. He gave his son. He gave us life. The breath that you've been taking for the last hour came because of him. Your heart has been beating. You haven't sat there and made it beat. It's because he's giving you life and breath and everything. This is a giving God. And the mark of God upon our life is we are giving people. And he holds Jesus Christ up as an example to them. I guess I'm going to close there. I have like 15 more pages of notes here. I'm kidding. There's not that many. Let me close with this. How do you know if you need the grace of giving in your life? Here's just some thoughts based on the scriptures we've read. One is I've lost my joy through the various trials I've encountered. Everybody has trials. If you've lost your joy and you don't have that overflowing joy that comes from the Spirit of God, then pray, God, give me your grace in my life. Don't allow these trials to hem me in. How do you know you need this grace? If you don't give because you're poor. This Macedonian church gave in extreme poverty. Jesus said there will always be poor people, but he calls the poor to give. He sees the giving of the poor. He sees the giving of the widow's mite. And when you give, it does something to the heart of God about supplying your need. I don't give because I lost my job. I don't give because I have very little income. I don't give because I'm cranky. You need the grace of God in your life. I don't give because I'm selfish. We don't like to admit that, but hey, if it's the reality, it is. I don't give what I'm able. I give as little as I can. Scripture says in Proverbs 11:24, one person gives freely and yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly and he comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. People curse the one who hoards grain, but they pray God's blessing on the one who is willing to sell. Last 2 things, I consider giving an obligation. If you're walking in that, you need the grace of God in your life. That he might move it into a joy and move it into a privilege in your heart. And then finally, giving is really an issue of the heart. If you have a problem being a giving person, maybe like this Macedonian church, we've got to say, I gave myself first to the Lord. And everything else followed that. So we'll close with that. I want to encourage you guys to give to the Lord. Give first of all your lives and give unto him. Give to the needs of the people you see around you. It's a great joy to be able to give to missions and to other people who have needs. So I pray that God would just bless us abundantly, that we would have the grace to give in our life a divine influence in our heart that actually begins to be reflected in our lives. Okay, we're going to have these guys come in for baptism here now. Tell them. Yeah, go ahead. Can you tell them to come in? You got it? You got it?